get together a lot, and we'll meet at a restaurant. And I should mention before that one of the main courses that Dave teaches is our course in emergency planning and emergency management. So we get together a lot. We meet at a restaurant. I always arrive 15 minutes early, but having to be better than me, Dave always arrives 20 minutes early. So he's sitting there. I arrive. I sit down. He always does three things. The second thing he does is remind me that I'm not wearing a tie, so I'm wearing this special for Dave today. The third thing he does is make some snide remark about the Air Force that you've already experienced. But the first thing he does is he says, "Kevin, have you checked around to identify where the emergency exits are?" And I say, "Dave, I'm here to eat, not to evacuate." But anyway, that's the kind of guy Dave is, and that's the kind of person we want to be. We all have to think about preparedness. We all talk about being prepared for security emergencies, being prepared to deal with surprises in procurement situations, in human resources, and dealing with people, and managing and leading, and healthcare management, and all sorts of arenas. We need to be prepared. And that's what I'm going to talk about for just a couple minutes today, because Sean asked me to address this very important topic that we don't think about a lot. And the point is that stuff happens. Sometimes bad stuff happens. Sometimes bad stuff can happen in our classrooms. All the time good things happen in our classrooms, a lot of learning and teaching and facilitating and discussing and growing and sharing perspectives, things like that. But we never know when something bad is going to happen in one of our classrooms. One of the things we talk about in our Webster program in security management is likelihood versus consequences. Is it very likely that something bad is going to happen in the classroom? No, not at all. Very, very unlikely. But if it does happen, the consequences can be tremendous. It can hurt. I was just thinking about this the other day, that what Barbara was talking about. It can hurt the brand of Webster. It can hurt the reputation of the region, of the military installation, of us as people and as a community. And it could result in injury or death. So we want to be prepared. We always want to be thinking, because the consequences can be very high. We want to think about that. Sean asked me specifically to address active shooters. And one of the reasons is that that's on a lot of people's minds right now. And it is periodically. And it's in the news. That's one of the things we're very concerned about because of incidents like this. Virginia Tech, Fort Hood, Aurora, Colorado, Newtown, Connecticut, and as Dave mentioned more recently, Quantico, right here down the street, or down 95. So it's on our mind, and these things can happen. As Sean mentioned, we normally work on campuses and teach on campuses where people have a lot of access to weapons, where people are under a tremendous amount of stress. A lot of stresses in the last few years beyond what I've ever known, with the things they have to deal with, representing our nation around the world and putting their life on the line every day, and sometimes being in some real nasty situations. So we need to think about these things. The potential is there. One of the things I want to just mention is the basic advice that the Federal Emergency Management Agency gives us on how to respond to an active shooter. And the answer is, take your choice. There's three ways. And these are actually listed in the order of preference. The best idea is to get the heck out of there. If you can, evacuate. If there's danger of any sort, get away from it. Think about that in advance. So you do want to know where the exits are, how to get out, where to get out, where to go. And as instructors, I think, especially if we're teaching in a facility maybe that we're not that familiar with, look at that. How do you get out of here if you have to? What am I going to do? What am I going to tell my students? Am I going to be in charge? What's going to happen? And then we all usually get to class a little bit early, some of us a lot early with the traffic around here. I usually get to class about 2 hours early because I don't want to mess with the Beltway traffic. But you can use some of that time to just familiarize yourself with the facility. Walk through the routes. How do I get out of here? What if the main exit is blocked? Where I'm teaching right now on bowling, if the main exit is blocked, I'm pretty much in a fix because there's only one way out of that floor of the building. But I need to know that. And I need to figure out another way or other things to do. So we need to think ahead. The second thing we want to do, I also want to mention, identify a rally point. If you're going to evacuate, don't just say, get out of here. We need to think ahead again. Where are we going to go? Now, again, at bowling, where I am this semester, it's very easy. There's a parking lot right across the street. Same thing where I teach at Belvoir. Right across the street, there's an athletic field with a parking lot. You know, the near corner of that parking lot is the best rally point as far as I'm concerned. So think about where you would go and where you would tell your students to meet you if we have to evacuate in an emergency. But you also need to think about alternatives. What if you're evacuating and it's 10 degrees outside and the students all run out without their jackets? Think about that. Now again, at bowling we have it great because we could just go across the street and meet in the education building where Sean and his team work, that's open after hours, that's nice and warm, has lights, communications, everything else you need. But what if that's not available? Where are you going to go? What if the weather's a problem or there's other conditions? So think about these things in advance. The second option is, as they say, hide out or shelter in place, as we say. And that's another thing you need to think about. How are we going to do that? Do our doors lock? Is there glass? Are there windows in the room or glass in the doors? And those are all considerations you need to take into account. And the third area is to confront, or the third option is to confront. Sometimes you have to do that. Say we make the decision where I am now at bowling on the second floor to evacuate. I'm going down the only stairway there is, and the bad guy is coming up the stairway with a gun. You're going to have to confront him or her. You're going to have to do something. And we need to think about confronting versus freezing. That's why this thinking in advance is really a helpful tool, and talking about it in advance. Because one of the things that many people do, and we've seen this throughout history, in an emergency is they freeze, and that's the worst thing to do. What you need to do is act. We've seen many examples of that. Back in the early 1990s, there was a case on the Long Island Railway where an individual got up, pulled out a handgun out of his bag, out of his gym bag, started walking down the train car shooting people. And he'd stop at each person and he'd shoot them, and then carefully step to the next one, shoot them. He reloaded that weapon 3 times and nobody did anything because they all just were so in shock they didn't know what to do. Finally, a couple guys jumped on him and wrestled him to the floor. But he was already out of ammunition by then, had already killed 6 people and injured 19. So we need to act. If we're in a classroom full or usually half or more full of big military people, and someone confronts that room or threatens that room, take them out, jump on them. Somebody might get hurt, sure, but you're going to save a lot of lives if you do that. So sometimes, unfortunately, you need to confront. Think about that in advance. So that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency advice. And here's a couple more pieces of advice I have for instructors. The bottom line, there is no one answer. So you have to think about it in advance and think about it on your feet a little bit. Each situation is very different. Plan ahead, think through the plan, and walk through it, at least in your mind. But if you can, walk through it physically. Check exit routes. Check how to get out of there. Think about it ahead. Practice situational awareness. Know what's going on around you. Communicate with students. One of the incidents, I'll talk about it in a minute a little more, Sean mentioned, was a situation where there was smoke in a classroom some time ago. And that's hard to assess. I mean, is that something where somebody, put a fork in the microwave down the hall and there's smoke? Is it something where the next classroom has a chemistry class in it and they're doing an experiment? Or is this something where the building's on fire? You don't know the answer to that. So you have to think about where you're going to draw the line, when you're going to act. Do we get out of here? Do we check it out? Do we alert someone? Think about it ahead of time. There are many, the next thing, when there's an active shooter or any kind of emergency related to that, what do you do when law enforcement arrives or when the cavalry gets there finally? Remain passive. If you are sheltered in place in a room and big guys with guns start running in, you don't run out and start screaming, hey, help me, help me. You just want to relax, make sure they can see your hands, because they don't know if you're the bad guy or the good guy. So be passive. Don't try to help them. Just remain and let them help you. Remember, their primary objective is to take out the threat, not to assist you immediately. You will be assisted later. And don't place demands on them, because they're there for a purpose, and that's to take out the threat or neutralize the threat. Observe and report. Be prepared, also thinking in advance, what information can you provide later on when you're interviewed? And I always say do that individually rather than getting together with your students and saying, well, what did he look like, or what did she look like, or can you give me a description? Because individual reports are much more accurate than group reports, because we don't want to get involved in groupthink and things start getting less and less accurate. Account for your students. Remember, as an instructor, you're pretty much responsible for them. Perhaps informally, but you should take responsibility for them. Notify, make sure as soon as possible after any kind of event that the Webster office knows, because they could be getting phone calls already before anything has cooled down, and they need to know what's going on. So let them know as well. And then follow up as necessary with Webster, with public affairs, with the installation, with law enforcement, and do those things. Call Sean, okay, personally. And he does answer his phone, I can guarantee it.
Sure.
All right, we also want to think about other types of emergency, yes?
If I could, just a moment, if you don't mind. My son was in Virginia Tech with the shooting, and I just wanted to share the fact that as instructors in the classroom, he was a student at the time, that you're not going to realize what's happening. It happens so quickly and you don't have time to think. And all I would say would be to think about it. I mean, mentally, get yourself in that position. Physically be in the room and imagine going through that as much as you can. You will not have time to respond. A little thing is like keep your keys in your pocket during your class time as well as your cell phone, because you're at a crime scene. You won't be able to go back and get your things. The other part of it is that use what you have around you. You are going to have students with different types of experience. The first day of class, find out who your student body is. Some people might be law enforcement, some people might have experience. But learn who you have in your classroom so you know who you can use to help you if the situation does happen. The other thing would be is that you set a tempo, stay calm, people will panic in your classroom, buddy up. To keep the people that are having a hard time, which they will, and keep quiet. Quiet is the best thing you can do to get yourself out of the situation. It's going to run fast. And then the last thing is for Webster, and this is for Sean, would be if we do have that happen, we have to be prepared as an institution to deal with that situation and get assistance for the students as well as the faculty that were there, whether they were in the room or in the building, whatever. But we have to be prepared, a plan to say we have to have something available for them, because you can't make the assumption that they will go and help on their own. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. All very good points, both during the incident and following up. Very, very good points. And we also need to realize that other emergencies can happen too. Anything from fire, hazmat, bomb threats, storms, medical situations, structural situations. I had one case about 5 years ago. Actually, it was before I walked into the classroom, but some of my students had gotten there early and one of them had a seizure. So, and the students actually took care of it and did a very, very good job and got the individual to the hospital. But that reminds me also about the orange sheet that Sean mentioned. That's just some information, again, it recounts that information from FEMA, but also there's emergency numbers on that list for our 4 campuses. And we need to know things like, for example, at bowling, you do not call 911. That's kind of what we're programmed to do. But bowling has a separate phone number for emergencies. It's a 202 number. And those are the kind of things we need to know. We also need to know that here at Andrews, for example, you do call 911, but you need to realize that if you call 911 from a landline, Andrews is going to respond. If you call 911 from a cell phone, it's going to go to Prince George's County. So you have to tell them, I'm at Andrews Air Force Base, because otherwise they'll just think you're somewhere in Prince George's County. So those kind of things are the things that we want to be aware of. And I hope those emergency numbers at least will be helpful to you. Okay, and again, just a recount of the same information. And again, Sean mentioned that there was that situation with smoke a little while ago. One of the things we want to do, and if we are going to evacuate a facility, whether it's an active shooter or something like that, or a fire or potential fire, sound the alarm. Let everybody in the building know that something's going on. Get them out of there. But again, we want to think ahead about the fire pull boxes, because we need to decide, are we going to pull it or not in a specific situation? What happens when I pull the alarm? Sean mentioned that one of the lessons learned from that incident a little while ago in one of our classrooms was that when you pull this alarm, it just sounds an audible alarm. It does not alert 911 or the first responders. So you have to call separately to the first responders, even if you pull the fire alarm at that particular facility. So learn about that in advance. And then, of course, the reason you need to think ahead and look at things, you might have a normal fire pull box, or in your facility, you might have something like this, where if you see that in an emergency, you're going to stop and say, well, what does that mean? Push, pull, what am I supposed to do? So know in advance what kind of boxes, what kind of, where the nearest telephones are, if you're going to use a landline, those kind of things. Simply think ahead. And that's our advice. The bottom line, the most effective safety measure is your practice of thinking ahead, knowing what's going on around you, and practicing situational awareness. Thank you. Miss Vicki.
You push or do you pull?
Pardon?
You push or pull?
In that case, I think what you do first is push and then pull. So, but, you know.
About 3 months ago, I sent out to all the faculty the police numbers at each of the bases. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I sure hope people put those in their cell phones, okay? Now, Kevin mentioned, if something happens, and I don't care if it's a fire alarm or something a lot worse, 1-800-Coleman, this is with me about 23 and a half hours a day, so the odds are that I'll hear it. If you can't reach me, you reach Jean. If you can't reach Jean or Sean, you reach the campus assistant director, and you keep calling through the staff until you reach someone. Now, in a major emergency situation, such as a shooter, Barb O'Malley is the crisis communications director for the university. So in the worst case situation, you can't reach anybody, you get a hold of the university. okay? Because there are a lot of things that happen as a result. And Barb needs to be kept in touch, all right? So, let us end on a sad note and take a break and come back for the high note and the keynote when we come back. So let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back for the keynote speech today, Dr. Pendleton. Thank you all.